it only verifies what I've said many times, which is that the people who are calling themselves Jews who control Israel are Europeans, and they are white. Are Europeans, and they are white. Are Europeans, and they are white. Were you born in Israel?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So you're a part of a reasonably unique subsection of Israel where all you know is Israel. And if you were told to go back to fill in the blank, like it would be theoretically, it would be Israel as far as your lifetime is concerned.
When you're saying go back, you need to know, like, people need to understand, like, hey, you have read the Bible. I came from here, from Judea and Samaria. That's the name of my origin, Jews. Like, this is where I came from. Like, if you go like 10 kilometers away from my house, there's open spaces. How can I say it? When you dig for roads, right, to build a new road,
yes,
sometimes you find new, like, ruins or stuff from from an old age, like 300, 400 feet, like even 1,000 years ago. And every time you found it, like 99% of the time, it is related. Like the 1% is the Greeks and the Romans that actually came here to try to, control the region in the old days. But rest of them is just like, old synagogues and Jewish old letters and all the antiques, whatever. But everything point out to be Jews. So we are indigenous to this region,
But let's dig in real quick. So firstly, you had mentioned that you are native to that land or indigenous to that land, whereas I know many Jews in America mostly, and I know some Israelis as well. Most of them beautiful women, some of them thick, but they all route their most immediate history that they're familiar with to Europe.
I just had a rabbi give me an analogy. He said, look, imagine you left your home and then someone came and occupied it, and then you try to get it back, and then they went to the judge. Have you heard some of these analogies? Maybe you can.
Yeah, that's assuming that, that's taking it into a place which I don't usually go. That's making the assumption that today's Jews are really the descendants of the ancient Hebrews that used to live in that part of the world some 3,000 years ago.
So, their parents are from Estonia, parents are from Ukraine, parents or grandparents are from Russia. Every single Jewish person I know, where's your grandmother from? Where's your great grandmother from? It's Europe. Where are your grandparents from?
I can tell you, my grandparents, both of them lived descendants, right? From one from Bulgaria and one from Spain. Actually, Spain, there'd been a deportation because in 1700, the thing is, the cycle always keep repeating. Like, you can't tell the Jew, go to this country, you'll be safe there, because they have been prosecuted in Spain. So they actually ran to Israel before even the First World Wars.
Sure.
There was nothing here, like nothing. But
have you been to Bulgaria, by the way?
I need to. I haven't.
Yeah, I hear good things about Sofia. I want to check it out myself. Mind you, I will cut you off from time to time, so you'll have to forgive me for that. So with regards to, and there's just so much to discuss, so we'll try to dig in. And are you in Tel Aviv as we speak?
Actually, no. I'm living Rosh Ain. It's like, you need to understand, since this state is 700 kilometers, everything is close. Like, I'm 15 minutes from Tel Aviv, 15 minutes from every central city in every direction, kind of.
Understood. Okay. So you're in a proper city outside of Tel Aviv that's still proximate to Tel Aviv.
It is, yeah.
Okay. And you're not in a bunker, you're in your own personal flat as of now, until a siren might go off, at which point you would have to then go to a bunker.
Yep, correct.
Okay. Oh yeah, let me ask you this before we get going too deep. I'm going to address some of the things you mentioned. This is a kind of conversation that is really important to hear, because it's a sincere conversation. There's no hatred on my part, there's no hatred on his part. We respect one another as men, and we want to have a conversation wherein we can have some mutual learning about Israel culturally, politically, perhaps militarily, because all of the Israelis do partake in the army, and also to understand how they come to the ideas that they come to. So he initially said, hey, all of us Jews, we really come from this land. And then I said, okay, well, all of the Jews I know come from Europe. Do you have any near, recent ancestors that come from Europe? And he says, yeah, Bulgaria and Spain, which are both European nations. And it only verifies what I've said many times, which is that the people who are calling themselves Jews who control Israel are Europeans, and they are white, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, joining us for our weekly segment, Bottom Line, is Algemeiner CEO Dovid Efunis. So, Dovid, let's jump right in. Genetically speaking, are Jews white?
Well, Natasha, it's important to understand, firstly, the intense sensitivity that this question has for the Jewish community. And actually, it's coming up at a personally very relevant time for me. Today is the anniversary of the passing of my great-grandfather, David Weinstock, who was arrested by the Nazis in Vienna in September 1939. And he was taken to the anthropological department at the Vienna Museum of Natural History, and he was subjected to, together with 440 other Jews, to degrading tests and measurements because he was considered by the Nazis to be of an inferior race. So it really is the height of irony and insult that when Jews express concern about anti-Semitism being ignored and a blindness to anti-Semitism, they're then lumped into the white category.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's more so a colonial settler state, and their story with the Bible, the Torah, their story of origin, and the reason that they believe they're entitled to that land is a necessary fiction so that they're not viewed poorly. Like, even when I'm traveling throughout the world, whether it's the Middle East or Europe or even Africa, if I encounter someone who's a racist, which every now and then, the racism will jump up out of someone, their first insult, because they can't insult me directly, right? Like, what is there to say directly? They're not going to insult my height because I'm tall. They're not going to insult my looks because my face is symmetrical. They're not going to insult my teeth because they grew in straight. I didn't even need braces. They're not going to insult my clothing because it's all custom. They're not going to insult my accommodations because it's 5-star. So what do they go to? Circumstance. So they'll say, "Oh, you're a slave." I'm like, well, I'm pretty well off for a slave now. And so I say that to say, like, someone's story of origin matters a lot, and it dictates the way that you are viewed, your story of origin. And whereas the blacks in America did not create their story of origin, nor did they modify their story of origin, they're viewed relatively poorly. And this is a reference point that hateful persons always reach back to. Oppositely, the Jews, those who call themselves Jews today and live in Israel, they have created their narrative.
You say, well, where did the name Ashkenazi came from? So a little over 1,000 years ago, as Jewish people scattered around the world had now immigrated in Europe and now were living in the Rhineland in Germany, they looked at the name Gomer in Genesis 10, and they connected Gomer with Germany. So they took on the identity of the name Ashkenaz. It has nothing to do with Ashkenaz in the Bible, which is a descendant of Japhet. It's just a name that was taken, okay? It's that simple. Just like my last name, Brown, doesn't refer to the color of my skin or anything else. It was shortened from a Russian name when my grandfather came over at Ellis Island. The name got shortened to Brown. It's just a name. That's all it is. So the idea that Ashkenazi Jews are descended from Japhet is a myth. 100% false.
The Jews, those who call themselves Jews today and live in Israel, they have created their narrative.
Learn how to play ball. That's what the Zionists did, except instead of a baseball team, they went to try to convince the Jews that the Jewish people are a nation, like France and like Spain. We'll get a land, that's Israel, that's our stadium. We'll get baseball bats and balls. We'll create a language. They sat down to create a language because nations need languages.
The Jews, those who call themselves Jews today and live in Israel, they have created their narrative.
Today, ladies and gentlemen, my DNA. Now, I bet you thought it was going to be a lot crazier than that, right? Now, you might ask yourself, why is it illegal to obtain this in the state of Israel? Because it proves through your DNA that Jews around the world have no ancestral ties to the land of Israel. But according to Israeli law, the fact that I have Jewish blood gives me more right to somebody's home and land in the land of Palestine than somebody that has been there for hundreds of years. Doesn't make sense.
There are Ashkenazi Jews who are entirely European in their DNA. That's why you're not allowed to have a DNA test in Israel, because it will reveal that virtually none of them are Semitic, virtually none of them have any ancestral connection to the land. I was viciously assaulted by a manager in the BBC who had recently converted to Judaism. It's fine. I love all religions. But you can't say I've now converted to Judaism and therefore I have a right to go to the land of Palestine and live in the house of someone whose ancestors have been living in it for thousands of years.
The Jews, those who call themselves Jews today and live in Israel, they have created their narrative.
Genetics are not identity, right? The criteria to determine Jewish identity are far more complex and really depend on who you go to as your authority. The mainstream rabbinic view, which is embraced by Orthodox Jews to be sure, and for most of Jewish history over the last couple millennia, has been that Jews receive their identity in two ways, either through matrilineal descent, meaning they are born of a Jewish mother, or through conversion. And there's a whole bunch of discussions about what exactly that conversion means. In the late 20th century, the Reform movement adopted a patrilineal descent, claiming biblical precedent. And in fact, when you look at biblical texts, there are some really interesting things that suggest that it may have been patrilineal in the biblical period. But, you know, this is not a discussion for this point. You can see I have another video on it. It did definitely switch.
They've associated it with something quite powerful, and they try their best to control that narrative, even if it would cause you to not believe your eyes. Yes, even if they would, you look at them and you're like, this is a white European, and they tell you, no, I'm from the Middle East. You're like, but you have red hair, or you have blue eyes, or you're clearly not from the Middle East. But they'll tell you to believe the story as opposed to the science or the clear evidence. And that is actually very clever on their part. And I can't hate them for being wise and exercising the best in strategy to get what they want.
So if the whole Iraq thing didn't happen, 9/11 and so on and so forth, things would be a lot different.
No, I said if Israel was never forcibly created, if the Western powers, the United States, Britain, namely, if they did not force a group of Europeans into the Middle East and murder to establish the state of Israel, and then engage in continuous murder to sustain and grow the state of Israel, that the peoples in Palestine and the Muslims surrounding would not have taken offense, and we would not be in protracted war, is what I'm saying.
Okay, but you do know, like, the Jews lived here also before...
That's a fairy tale.
What? Sorry?
Name two books that were written at the time that the Jews were there that explain that the Jews, white Jews, were there, and then white Jews went back to the factory of white people, which is Europe. Are there any historical texts that were written during that time that validate that, aside from the texts that... Okay, what are they?
Do you know Tom Sawyer author? Sorry, what do you call it?
I'll pull up the book right now. What's it called?
What's the author of Huckleberry Finn? I forgot his name.
Yes, I'm familiar with the author of Huckleberry Finn, right. But I stated specifically books that were written during that time, meaning a historian observing.
No, but I'm trying No, listen. I'm trying to say something very specific. Why I bring it up? Because you were actually here. He was here before the establishment of the state, and he described what he saw. He saw Jews, he saw Arabs. They was not called Palestinians by then. He called this land barren and empty. He, I quote, didn't think anybody would live here. Who would live here? What is this country? Nothing is here except
But if
Jerusalem.
that was true, the Palestinians wouldn't say that you're stealing their land. If that was true, there wouldn't have been a two-state solution. If that were true, what Christopher Columbus said when he came to the Americas would also be fictional, which is to say he said he discovered the Americas. He didn't discover it. The people living there had discovered it. And so what you're basically referencing is the perspective of a person who is ill-informed or dishonest. And that happens. Sometimes an individual man may be ill-informed or dishonest. In the case of Christopher Columbus, he was surely both. He was ill-informed and dishonest. And so you're suggesting that the land that you guys have occupied forcibly was empty. And that's just not true. The sloganization about...
I didn't say it though.
That's what you're leading to right now.
Actually, no. People lived here, Jews and Israelis.
Yes, and if that's the
Jews
case,
and,
why did the people who were in Europe need to flee out of Europe and force their way into a land where they were not wanted? They should have stayed where they were. And just like you said, you have ancestors who were most recently living in Bulgaria and Spain. And all of the Jews that I know, they're from Ukraine, they're from Poland, they're from Estonia, they're from Romania, they're from Europe. That's where you guys are from. And so the question is, why didn't you stay where you are, where you were?
I'll answer it. Do you know what pogrom is?
I know exactly what that is. And so now, so that was a setup. You just fell into the trap. So here's a step 2 on that. So a pogrom, or an expulsion or a persecution occurring toward the Jews. Now the question then is, well, why are people treating you like this? It's not like you're black, right? It's not like they look around and they're like, hey, we're white, you're black, we're going to treat you badly because you're so different than us. You see, black and white, we're nearly opposites in some ways, but you're white and they're white. And so really what happened is that you were practicing a different culture that was problematic within that nation, and they took offense to it, and they did what societies do. They punish behavior that they deem to be bad. Now, the real question is not what's a pogrom. The real question is, what were you doing that caused you to be expelled from places where you're from?
The answer is very simple. What do you call it? There's like, I heard stories of my grandfather. They thought he's
in like, Bulgaria or in Spain?
In Spain.
In Spain, okay.
There's been a true like witch hunts and something crazy. They think we drink blood, like some crazy stuff.
Some of
like,
you guys do drink blood.
What?
In a unanimous decision, New York City's Department of Health agreed parents must first give their written consent before allowing Moyles to perform a controversial part of the Jewish circumcision ritual.
We have clearly identified that one specific procedure that's performed as part of some circumcisions, what we're calling direct oral suction, can be transmitting infections to infants.
The new regulations, the first in the country, come after health officials identified 11 babies who contracted herpes from the oral part of the circumcision. 2 of them died. The Centers for Disease Control has stated the procedure is not safe.
Not only is it a safe method, it's the safest method.
Rabbi William Handler calls this a direct attack on the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community and its customs, and says government is overstepping its bounds. Cantor Philip Sherman says he's performed more than 20,000 circumcisions, 6 just today. He says this is not about Jewish tradition, but rather everyone's well-being.
Now, today, we know that germs can be transferred, diseases can be transferred from the baby to the moil, and from the moil to the baby. So therefore, you can continue this custom by using a sterile tube, a gauze pad, and the rest of the bris is fine.
Health officials say it is going to be very difficult to enforce these regulations. They say that's because they really can't monitor moils as they perform circumcisions. They say it is first going to take a complaint from someone before they can take any action.
Now you can have tubes, so why not? The answer, as I thought about it, is that it's not as effective because the tube does not seal as well. It's not as pliable. It's not as quick, and it's not as close. You have to have a quick suction action. There's the theory, some people feel that it is, some people feel that it's not, that the saliva of a human being has some antiseptic qualities. And it's actually brought in the halacha of the Talmud that the saliva of certain people were actually used as curatives. Saliva is not a bad thing. Saliva has elements of cleaning, of antiseptic elements within it. The suction process of the mouth is quicker, more pliable, and it doesn't, and it's more exact and works much better.
Yes, I think it's called mitzvah bapeh, when they cut the foreskin of the infant's penis, and then the rabbi takes the penis into his mouth and drinks the blood from the penis. You're not familiar with that?
I actually haven't experienced it myself. I never seen anyone rabbi do that.
You know what I'm talking about, though, right?
Some disgusting. I maybe overheard it, but I never saw anyone do it.
You've heard of this, though, right?
Sure. What about horns on our head?
No, I'm just saying that you said that they think that you drink blood, and I said, well, some of you do drink blood, so that's probably where that came from, which is to say it's not coming out of nowhere. It's not complete fabrication. Now, you're speaking of other things that are stereotypes and they were created by hateful people. I agree. Is there anti-Semitism? Absolutely. Is there racism? Absolutely. So I'm not denying that. I think that you're correct in as much as that's the case. Is there jealousy? Oh, for sure. What? People are always jealous of winners. And frankly, the Jews are winning. So I agree with you there. So I was saying that a lot of people are jealous of the Jews, and jealousy is a terrible thing. And frankly, it's because you guys are doing a great job. And that's why I always, while being critical, I'm balanced. I also commend the good works. But what I'm saying is that some of the things you're speaking of with regards to the reason Jews may be persecuted in a given territory is it was earned. It wasn't that, I'm not saying it's right in every case. I'm saying it was earned, which is they don't want to assimilate. For example, I've lived in Los Angeles and Hollywood, and the Jews will not talk to you. I've lived in Baltimore, and there's a very wealthy section of Jews there. And of course, I was raised in capital for the Johns Hopkins University. So I had some dealings with these folks, and they would even tell me that in their neighborhood, if someone's going to sell their house, they won't sell it to a goy. They'll only sell it to someone who's Jewish. And so there's no level of integration. So you go into a society that is not your own, and then you want to speak Yiddish, you want to have a Jewish police, the Shamrim, you want to completely separate and treat others as though they're less than, and then suggest that you are the superior people in the same way that the Nazis did. And so, of course, that's going to make you a hated people, right? I mean, that makes perfect sense, no?
Actually, no. What you say is like you're assuming that if I'll go there, I'll be treated differently. I
If
think
you go where?
the op-
Oh, no, I'm not assuming. I just told you. I'm saying from my experience, I lived in Hollywood, California, among Jews, and I have engaged them, and I see the way that certain of them behave. And I've lived in Baltimore, raised significant amounts of capital, particularly on behalf of the Johns Hopkins University. I've had conversations with these folks. I've seen how they treat them, and I recounted a story, a true story to you. And I've also raised capital in Cincinnati, and this is when I tend to encounter higher numbers of Jews, even religious Jews, when I'm dealing in capital, high level finance. And you know, there's certain conversations they won't have with you, and you can tell by the way that they treat you that there's a certain feeling. And then research will tell you that the Jews in New York, for example, have the Shamrim, and also in various places that I've been, Baltimore, Cincinnati, they have their own hospitals and their own schools. They live completely separately. There's no level of integration. There's no level of respect for the greater society. So I've spoken to many Jews in Hollywood, for example, even Jews from Iran, from Iran, and they'll be pretty transparent, some of them, but they have such heavy accents, and they were born and raised in America, and they have such heavy accents because they've been speaking Yiddish or Hebrew, and their English is bad. You understand? They have bad English. So what I'm speaking of is not of hearsay. I'm speaking of experience.
What's your thoughts? Please be respectful with your comments. Also, please click the like, click the notification bell, and subscribe to this channel.
Listen, Genesis chapter 11 verse 10 explains the genealogy of Shem. Shem was a black man in Africa. If you repeat this back, Genesis 14 verse 13, Abraham steps on the scene. Being a descendant of Shem, which is a fact, means Abraham too was black. Abraham, born in the city of a black man, called Nimrod, grandson of Ham. Ham had 4 sons. One was named Canaan. Here, let me do some explaining. Abraham, Isaac was Jacob had 12 sons, for real, and these were the children of Israel. According to Genesis chapter 10, these were the children of Israel. According to Genesis chapter 10, these were the children of Israel. According to Genesis chapter 10.